There is a school of thought that holds the client is always right. There is another school of thought that holds the client is a person who wants a particular answer and has engaged you to go and find it. These two philosophies are generally in tension. In the Calder case, they were at war. Vivienne Calder was the most persuasive client I had received in 3 years of practice. She was also, in nearly every respect that signified, wrong. The two things are not unrelated.
Maud West, private inquirer, licensed, discreet, and, as of a Tuesday morning in October, in possession of a retainer paid in ready money, a client with a charming manner, and a husband who died of natural causes that no one on either side of the inquiry can quite leave alone. The Unreliable Widow.
My office occupies the first floor of my townhouse in Bloomsbury. There are 2 chairs, a desk, a window overlooking a wet October street, and a filing cabinet that locks. I have arranged the room to reveal very little about its occupant, which is a habit that has served me tolerably well in the professional line and rather less well in the personal one, though I have not yet settled that particular account. Vivienne Calder arrived on a Tuesday morning. She was 38, recently widowed, and dressed with the restraint of a woman who knows she will be observed and has elected to be seen doing the correct thing. She was handsome. Not beautiful. Handsome. With the variety of stillness that is either genuine composure or very well practised composure. From my side of the desk, at that hour, I could not yet determine which. She told me about Reginald the way a woman tells a story she has told before, not because it is untrue, but because she has found the version that lands best. The grief was present. I am not suggesting otherwise. I am saying it had been edited. Her husband had died 6 weeks prior. Heart failure, the physician said. Natural causes, the inquest confirmed. Vivienne did not accept either verdict. She believed, or presented herself as believing, that Reginald had been poisoned by his business partner, a man named Aldrich Peel, with whom Reginald had been conducting an acrimonious dissolution of their firm. She had no evidence. She had instinct, she said, and a husband who had been in perfectly sound health until the fortnight he signed the partnership papers over. She said, "I am not by nature a suspicious woman." I remarked to myself that this is precisely what a suspicious woman would say. It is also precisely what a guileless one would. I engaged myself to the case. She paid the retainer in ready money. I noted this without remark. There are things a client does that are accounted for by caution, and things that are accounted for by something rather different, and at that stage I was not persuaded which applied. I called on Aldrich Peel at his offices in the city that afternoon. He received me in a conference room. Not his own office, a small but legible tell. He was civil, careful, and forthcoming in exactly the manner of a man who has determined in advance what he will be forthcoming about. His hands, when I raised the matter of a particular payment Vivienne had flagged, were perfectly still. Rather too still. He had been expecting the question.
I'd been watching Vivienne Calder for 3 weeks before she engaged Maud West. Not for the matter of the husband, for fraud, or rather for her proximity to a fraud I had been building a case around for the better part of 4 months. Peel was the principal. Mrs. Calder was the complication. When my man at the inquiry agency, Mrs. Calder, had first approached, informed me she had gone elsewhere, to West specifically, there was a silence of about 4 seconds before I said, "I see." He asked whether it was a difficulty. I said no, it was a difficulty. It was a difficulty because Maud West is not an instrument to be pointed at a problem. She is a person conducting her own inquiry with her own conclusions, and she would not thank me for knowing what she did not. I told myself it was a manageable complication. I was wrong in this, which I should have known had I thought about it for longer than 4 seconds. I did not send word to her. I told myself there was nothing definitive to pass on as yet. I was not precisely lying to myself. There was nothing definitive. But there was sufficient. I knew that. And I set it aside, and I continued.
Vivienne arranged for me to call at the house in Knightsbridge, on the pretext of returning certain papers from the solicitor. She grasped that I required access, and furnished me a reason for it, which was either considerate or well organised, and I was not yet settled on the distinction. The house was large and running with the efficient melancholy of a place suspended between one state and the next. The housekeeper, Clara Ose, had been with the household 9 years, and possessed the particular competence of someone who maintains order, precisely because order is the one thing presently within her charge. She conducted me through the principal rooms without remark. She did not conduct me to the study. I found the study without assistance. The locked drawer took 11 minutes. The key was in the 3rd volume of a set of Gibbon on the left-hand shelf, which is where I should have placed it myself. The drawer contained 3 letters from a physician, dated across 4 years, charting the deterioration of Reginald Calder's cardiac condition, with the dispassion particular to medical correspondence, a draft will, and a note in Reginald's own hand. It read, "If V finds this, it is too late. I am sorry. I was afraid she would leave." I stood at the desk for a moment. Then I photographed everything, replaced it precisely, and closed the drawer. I went to find Clara. She was engaged with the silver in the kitchen in the manner of a woman who is attending to a task whilst waiting for something else to occur. She told me that Mr. Calder had been a private gentleman. She told me that Mrs. Calder was a practical woman. She returned to the silver. She had left the key in the Gibbon herself. I was aware of this, and she was aware that I was aware, and neither of us gave voice to it. That was sufficient. I waited upon Holt, the solicitor, Reginald's personal man, now managing the estate. On my return, he was mild, careful, and reluctant in the manner of a man trained to guard his client's affairs, who is no longer entirely certain which of the persons making inquiries is the client. I asked after a codicil. He produced the appointment record. The codicil had been drawn up at Peel's instigation by Peel's own clerk, and conveyed to Reginald at his home for signature 3 weeks before Reginald's death. It considerably increased Vivienne's share of the estate. Peel had witnessed it. This was not, on the face of it, evidence of anything unlawful. A man may amend his will. His partner may witness it. The timing was the matter of consequence. 3 weeks before the dissolution was due to conclude, 4 days before the auditor submitted his preliminary findings. Whoever had arranged the amendment had done so in the knowledge of what the auditor was about to discover. I walked back to my office in the rain. I was beginning to apprehend the shape of it. I did not care for the shape.
The fraud was complete. 4 years of diverted client funds through a subsidiary account Reginald had never examined with any care. Peel had conducted the dissolution negotiations to buy himself time, and Reginald had died in the midst of it, and the death had been convenient. Not brought about, but convenient. I had a warrant prepared, I had everything required for the arrest. I sat on the warrant for 4 days. There are actions a detective takes that are defensible, and actions that are merely expedient, and for 4 days I had been persuading myself that the two were equivalent. I had made use of Maud's access to the Calder household without her knowledge. I had permitted her to investigate a client I had reason to regard as a person of interest without informing her of the fact. I had received the surveillance reports and filed them and carried on. This is termed withholding material information. It has a lengthier designation in the disciplinary code. I had been framing it to myself as operational necessity, which is the form of words one employs when one means I required her not to know. And I had been telling myself that was distinct from wishing her not to know, and it was not. I came to a decision. I put the warrant in my inside pocket. I went to her office.
I had a second interview with Vivienne. I did not reveal everything. I never reveal everything, but sufficient to observe what moved. I told her I had found no evidence that Peel had poisoned her husband. I told her the payment she had flagged appeared lawful on its face. I watched her receive this. She was not relieved. She was recalculating. The recalculation was rapid and controlled, and had I not been attending to it, I should have missed it entirely. The half-second between receiving the intelligence and performing disappointment. I caught it. I noted it. She retained me for another week. That told me everything that was needful. I returned to Holt. This time I raised the question of the codicil directly. Who had instigated it? Whether Reginald had attended the office in person? What the circumstances attending the signature had been? Holt was reluctant. I was patient. He was eventually forthcoming because I had ordered my questions in such a manner that being helpful seemed to him to have been his own idea. The codicil had been arranged by Peel, conveyed to Reginald at home, executed in Peel's presence, and witnessed by Peel, 3 weeks before the dissolution, 4 days before the auditor. I now held 2 concurrent hypotheses. 1. Vivienne had arranged the codicil through Peel in exchange for her silence regarding the fraud. 2. Peel had arranged it himself in order to secure Vivienne's cooperation before she might become a liability. I could not yet determine which direction the pressure had run. In my experience, when one cannot determine which direction the pressure ran, it is generally because it ran in both directions simultaneously. I called on Vivienne a 3rd time, without announcement. She was in the garden. October, raining, and she was standing at the far end of it without an umbrella, regarding something I could not make out from the window. When the housekeeper announced me, she turned at precisely the speed of a person who has been expecting a caller, not myself specifically. Someone. I asked whether she had known of the fraud before Reginald died. She said she had not. I asked after the codicil. There was a silence, of somewhat greater duration than the last. Then she said, Reginald wished to make proper provision for me. He knew his health was not all it should be. He asked Aldrich to assist him in putting his affairs in order. I asked whether she had known his health was failing. A very long silence. She said, not until after. She was telling an untruth about something. I was no longer confident it was the matter I had originally entertained suspicions about. There is a particular quality to an untruth told in self-defence. It has a different grain to one told for advantage. What I heard in that garden, in the rain, was the first kind, which meant the second kind was still somewhere I had not yet looked.
We'll pause there for a moment. If you're listening to Micropulse, we'd very much like to know where you are and what the hour is, wherever in the world you happen to be tuning in. Leave it in the comments, your location, your hour, your corner of things. Every note you leave helps this community along, and we read everyone. Now, back to Knightsbridge. The Calder house. Knightsbridge, a warrant in an inside pocket, and 4 days of thinking about it. A client in a garden without an umbrella. A lock drawer and a note inside it that answered the wrong question. Somewhere in the city, a solicitor who had been expecting to be found out, and in an office in Bloomsbury, a detective who had begun to understand that the case she had been engaged to investigate was not quite the case she was conducting. There was a knock at the door, 8 o'clock in the evening. No note sent ahead. That too was sufficient.
He knocked at my office door at 8 in the evening. Not a note sent ahead. Not a professional occasion arranged through the proper channels. A knock at the door. I knew from the knock that it was Flynn. I do not mean that I recognise the sound. I mean there is a quality to the manner in which Flynn goes about things that announces itself ahead of the reason. He came in. He sat. He still had his coat on. which meant he was not proposing a long stay, or was not certain whether he was. He had something in his inside pocket which he did not immediately produce. He told me what he knew, all of it. The fraud, the 3 weeks of observation before I engaged myself to the case, the hotel meetings between Vivienne and Peel, the 4 days he had sat on his warrant. He did not arrange it as a professional courtesy. He told me directly.
I ought to have told you before you took the case. I knew about her when you took it. I permitted you to go in with information I held that you did not. And I told myself it was operationally sound. It was not. It was convenient for me, which is a different matter entirely.
How long have you been watching her?
3 weeks before you took the case. 5 weeks in total.
And the observation of the house?
Yes.
The hotel meetings? Vivienne and Peel?
4 occasions. First fortnight of August, once in September. Not his office. The Langham. She initiated contact. He attended.
You have the dates.
I have the dates.
She was not his accomplice. She was his insurance policy.
And he was hers. Yes, that is how I read it also.
Which is why she needed someone else's name on a report suggesting he'd done murder. In the event the arrangement became inconvenient.
In the event, he decided she knew too much to leave at liberty.
Is she under arrest?
Peel is, tomorrow morning. Vivienne. I have not sufficient for Vivienne. The codicil is irregular but not unlawful. The arrangement with Peel is coercion at best, and she would argue mutual advantage. The fraud is Peel's.
She engaged me to produce evidence against a man she already had well in hand.
Yes.
In the event that he slipped her grasp.
That is how I read it.
The note in the drawer, Reginald's note.
What of it?
He knew his heart was failing. He had known for 4 years. He concealed it from her, from Peel, from the bank. He died without telling a soul.
Natural causes, yes.
There was no murder, Flynn.
No.
She hired me to investigate a crime that did not occur.
She hired you because a crime she was involved in was about to be discovered, and she required a record of having acted in good faith. Yes.
The most useful thing I did for Vivienne Calder was find that drawer.
You were not meant to find it.
No. Clara left the key for someone, not for Vivienne. Clara knew. She has always known. She left it for whoever came looking with the right sort of care. You ought to have told me.
I know.
I am not angry.
You ought to be.
Yes. I rather think I should.
I told myself there was insufficient to act on. That was accurate for approximately the first 10 days.
And after 10 days?
After 10 days, it was no longer accurate.
But you continued.
I continued.
Why did you come tonight?
Because the warrant is signed, and the arrest is tomorrow morning, and there was no longer any professional reason not to.
That is the reason you came when you did. It is not the reason you came.
No, it is not.
He left. I heard his footsteps on the stair, unhurried even, and then the street door, and then nothing but the rain. I sat in the office for a time. I am not certain how long. The fire had gone low, and I did not get up to attend to it. There is a particular quality to a room after someone has been in it and gone. A kind of residual presence. The air still arranged around a person who is no longer there. I am not given to fanciful thinking. I note it as an observation. I thought about Reginald Calder in his study with the locked drawer. I thought about the note he wrote, and never sent, or never intended to send, or perhaps simply could not find the occasion for. Some things we compose are not communications. They are attempts to set in order what we cannot say aloud. I understood that rather better, sitting in the dark in Bloomsbury, than I had when I first read it. I thought about Vivienne in the garden without her umbrella. I thought about Clara polishing silver, and the key left in the gibbon for whoever came with the right sort of attention. I thought about the codicil, and the hotel meetings, and the particular shape of an arrangement between two people who do not trust each other, and cannot afford to say so. I did not think about the hat on the desk. I was very deliberate about that. Presently I got up, trimmed the lamp, and sat down at the desk. The hat was gone. He had taken it when he left, naturally. I do not know at what point. I had not been watching. I took out a sheet of paper. I dipped the pen. I wrote a letter to Vivienne Calder. The letter advised her that the matter of her husband's death had been referred to Scotland Yard in connection with a related inquiry into financial irregularities, that my professional engagement had accordingly concluded, and that the enclosed account represented my final charges. The letter was correct in every particular. It was also a message. Vivienne would apprehend it as one.
Peel was arrested the following morning. He did not resist. His solicitor had advised him that resistance was not in his interest. The matter took 11 months to come to trial. He was convicted on 6 counts of fraud. Vivienne Calder gave a statement. Her arrangement with the prosecution, concluded by my superior officer, not by me, meant she was not charged. She attended the first 2 days of the trial. Then she stopped. The inquiry into the death of Reginald Calder was formally closed as inconclusive. There was no murder. The file notes, natural causes, confirmed. I signed the closure myself.
A week after the arrest, I was sorting the Calder papers. The note I had found in Reginald's locked drawer. If V finds this, it is too late. I am sorry. I was afraid she would leave. I had entered into my case record and returned the original to the estate. I do not know whether Vivienne loved him. I suspect the question cannot be answered with any confidence, and may have been equally unanswerable to Vivienne herself. I think she regarded him. I think she was well organised in her regard. I think, had he lived and had the health and the will and the fraud all remained buried, she would have been a tolerably satisfactory wife. The irony, that his fear she might leave was not entirely without foundation, is not one I propose to state directly. He is dead. She is at liberty. Some ironies are not mine to deliver. The most dangerous clients are those who are partly right. Vivienne Calder was right that Peel was a criminal. She was right that the dissolution was fraudulent and that Reginald had been cheated. She was right that his death was convenient for all concerned. She was wrong only about the mechanism. There was no poison, no deliberate hand, only a tired heart in a man who was afraid. The files will record the fraud. They will record Peel's conviction. They will not record the 3 years Reginald spent managing his decline alone, nor the draft will he wrote and never dispatched, nor the note in the drawer that opens with a conditional. If V finds this. She did not find it. I found it. I am not persuaded that is preferable. I returned Vivienne's retainer, not because she had not paid for work undertaken. She had, and I had undertaken it. I returned it because I wished to be done with the transaction. Sometimes that is the only manner in which a case may be properly closed. Flynn sat on a warrant for 4 days because he required time to determine what to tell me before he moved. He came to my office at 8 o'clock of a Tuesday evening and told me everything. He did not send a note in advance. He did not wait for a professional occasion. He knocked on my door. I said I was not angry. I said it before I had properly considered the matter, which is not my customary manner of proceeding. I have been giving thought since to whether that was honesty or whether it is something I ought to examine more carefully. I have not examined it more carefully. I remain so. He told me I ought to be angry. He said it quietly, which is the register he employs when something is not the professional version of itself. I know what that register signifies. I have been attending to it for some little while now. I have not remarked upon it, and I do not intend to, but I know. Until the next inquiry, I remain Maud West, private inquirer, engaged occasionally as an unwitting instrument, it appears, and, it seems, increasingly difficult to deceive. Even by those I should most prefer not to catch at it.
You've been listening to the case files of Maud West. Tonight's episode, The Unreliable Widow. Join us next time when another truth waits to be brought to light by whoever is patient enough and honest enough to go looking for it.